You're watching KTN Prime, and we thank you for staying with us. Tonight, we're having a candid conversation about corruption. Where are we as a country in terms of fighting corruption? Have we gotten to a point where we now politicize the fight against corruption? And of course, we have the opposition. What role are they playing in the fight against corruption? Are they helping? Are they making it worse? What are the solutions, really, if Kenya has to rid itself of corruption? We're having this discussion with Kieni Member of Parliament, Kanini Kega, is here with me. And of course, at our I&M studio, we have Hassan Omar. He's the Mombasa Senator. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on KTN Prime. Kanini, let me begin with you. How would you rate the Jubilee administration's fight against corruption?
We are doing very well. And from the onset, fighting corruption is not an event. It's actually a process. And I think when we came up with the new constitution, we set up independent offices to fight corruption. We have the office of the Director of Public Prosecution. We also have the EACC, which are actually independent bodies which are charged with fighting corruption. And I find it very strange when the opposition all the time they're telling the president that you are not fighting corruption. Yet we have independent offices which are actually doing that. But of course the president has gone a notch higher, and you remember that he brought together with EACC that list to Parliament. And that, of course, was a show that he is really ready to fight for corruption. And 5 members of his cabinet were actually, they stepped aside and they are under investigation. So I think we are doing very well. And as I said, fighting corruption is not the aspect of just that revolving door at EACC. It's not an event, it's a process.
Hassan, there are institutions, the Jubilee administration is doing very well in the fight against corruption. Do you agree with that?
I think Kanini lives in another world, absolutely. But I think holding brief for the government here ought to say that. But you see, today corruption ought to have been have been fought from the very moment that Uhuru's government came into power. Yesterday, Muhammad Buhari, the president of Nigeria, ordered the arrest of his brother-in-law. Before that, immediately he came in, he made it very clear that I am going to fight graft in this country, and he ordered the arrest of several members of the former and present members of the Central Bank of Nigeria. What Uhuru did do, he waited for
Hassan,
a chorus of...
Hassan, just give me a minute. We're trying to work on something. I can't hear you quite clearly. Let's see if we can sort that out. Give me a few minutes. But Kanini Kega, when the president went into Parliament and he gave that State of the Nation address, and he looked like the only person who is concerned about the fight against corruption, is he the only person who's fighting corruption in the country, would you say?
The government is made up of 3 arms of government. We have 3 arms of government. That is executive, we have the legislature, we have the judiciary. And when you're talking about fighting corruption, corruption is everywhere. It's in the judiciary, it's in the executive, it's in the legislature. And more so, it's also in the devolved government. I'm a member of PAC, one of the new members who actually replaced the other members who were actually dropped. And we had a very interesting discussion with Auditor General, who told us that a lot is happening in the county governments. And in fact, we were even shocked that he told us that there are some counties he is unable to access. His officers are unable to access because whenever they want to go into, they want to do audit, and especially the far-flung counties, there are always reported cases of insecurity. Sometimes you see as if they are organized kind of crime so that the auditors don't visit those areas. So we ask yourself, is it the president only who is supposed to fight corruption? The president is doing his part. We ask the other arms of government to also do their part.
Question is, are they? Let's bring in Hassan Omar again. Hassan, I'm hoping I can hear you now. Kanini Kega says there are institutions in place and the Jubilee administration is doing very well in terms of fighting corruption. What are your thoughts on that?
As I said before we had the interruption, is that Kanini must be living in another world. I think they think fighting corruption is rhetoric. The president is rhetorical. We see Kanini giving himself a scorecard of doing very well. The word very well has lost meaning, if that was what we see is very well. As I was saying earlier, Muhammad Buhari sent a very terse message when he became president of Nigeria. Yesterday, Muhammad Buhari ordered the arrest of his own brother-in-law for alleged extortion. In his first few days in office, he had sent a clear signal about what his commitment was in terms of fighting corruption. What we have seen in Jubilee, after a litany of protests from across the spectrum of the formations of our society, the opposition, the civil society, and other stakeholders, is when Uhuru now comes with this rhetoric of fighting corruption by coming with a list in Parliament, where if we were to go by that list, that demonstrates to you 5-6 cabinet secretaries. That demonstrates to you how endemic and runaway corruption had been left to be. Just recently, we saw the suspension again of members of the Kenya Airports Authority. What had happened is corruption had become a commonplace in the Jubilee administration. It is public pressure that pushed Uhuru to do what he did, but he's fighting it in a manner that today his own cabinet secretary is challenging whether the institution or ESCC, as it were, is rightly constituted. So I think what has happened in this whole charade is a public relation exercise which is devoid of the constitutional foundations. You try to then decimate the very institution that you expect to fight corruption by trying to remove the ESCC commissioner so that you can then now appoint your own commissioners through Kinakanini Kega, who will be sitting in the National Assembly soon to validate those appointments. So I think in a true scorecard, Jubilee has performed dismally. Uhuru is trying to do what I call patchwork. And I think that patchwork is so badly done because this temptation of always being a PR president is literally ruining, even possibly suffocating the fight against corruption.
Hassan, are you trying to imply that there is no political will to fight corruption in the country? I mean, to be fair, the president has been out there not once, not twice, not thrice, talking about corruption. Remember with KA when he mentioned the buses, when he was talking about individuals in his office, and of course what you just mentioned when he went into Parliament and gave that list that touched on some of his cabinet secretaries, some of his PSs. You don't see that as political goodwill to fight corruption?
It's tough rhetoric. It's tough rhetoric. What happens is he needed to fight it from day one. You didn't have to suspend 5-6 cabinet secretaries if you are committed from the very onset. We have seen literally everything within the Jubilee government has been challenged. From the standard gauge railway, there's a challenge before it. Any mega project, there are structural challenges in terms of whether the award was done legitimately, whether there were no corrupt practices in the award of those tenders. So I think until at that point when the chorus in the public had become quite consistent. Then the president now goes with some kind of an amorphous confidential list that he was provided for by the ESCC director or chief executive, and then now starts this charade. Even his own, as I said, his own cabinet secretary is challenging the process. And I think what justice must be seen to be done. I've had my own colleagues who are Jubilee senators, Murkomen, Kipchumba, Sang, talking about the issues of natural justice, that you do not come and release lists of people under investigations. You needed to at least get to a certain threshold before you come and make such kind of wild statements just for the cheers or the public gallery for a day or two, and then get into very structural challenges. Okay. Say you received a confidential list from the CEO, then later on disband the very commission that was supposed to prosecute these matters or take these matters to its logical conclusion.
All right, Kanini Kega, you've listened in to Hassan Omar and his thoughts about whether or not this government is fighting corruption. Says there is no political will. What is the one thing that you can say the Jubilee administration has done to show its will to fight corruption in the country? Because he says these are games.
I think my good friend Senator Hassan is still in the old mindset, whereby there's in the old constitution, whereby the president was everything. The president was in charge of everything. He used to direct even the director of public prosecution. But now we have independent offices, and I think what the president has done is commendable. That I don't think there is anything more that the president needs to do for him to show that he has given that political goodwill. I think we should be asking the other heads of the other arms what they are doing. We should ask the Chief Justice what he's doing.
In your opinion, how are they doing?
I don't think they are doing good enough. I don't think they are doing enough to supplement what actually the president has done, because there is so much. The president can only do so much. So the moment now the president goes beyond that, of course, they will now be saying that the president is interfering with prosecution and all that. So I think the president has done enough. It is up now to the other institutions to do their part.
So basically, the president is doing enough. His foot soldiers are not helping him.
Not foot soldiers, the other heads of the different arms of government. And I think also, like for example, the head of or the chairman of the Council of Governors, I think they should also be asking serious questions about the other governors, because there are serious issues about counties, and I think literally every county in this country has corruption issues. For example, the Nyeri case, I'm just taking that example because that is where I come from. There are two individuals, two ministers who have been adversely mentioned, and I think the case has been taken over by the DPP. And of course, when you ask the governor says that we have to wait for the conclusions to be made. And of course, they have been mentioned adversely. The moment you are mentioned adversely, I mean, the noble thing for you to do is to step aside.
So basically, there's no concerted effort to fight corruption.
Absolutely. It is now that it's only the president who is seen to be fighting corruption. The other heads of the different institutions are not helping the president. Okay. But I also say, I mean, it's also good to say, corruption is not like the normal theft, whereby there is a complainant. Corruption is a case of a willing giver and a willing taker.
There are complainants, the public.
Yeah, the public. But, and sometimes it also becomes very hard to prosecute those cases. But I think the DPP, of course, who is a very, very competent person, should at least do more. We need to see people going to jail. Unfortunately, he has been in office for the last, I think, 3 years, and we have not seen the big fish going to jail.
That is one of the main concerns. Let's see if we can listen into a bite from a politician who was talking about whether he was focusing on the story, the NYS saga, and he was giving his sentiments on whether or not Devolution Cabinet Secretary Anne Waiguru needs to go home and the involvement of court in this whole debate.
Also hereby direct that all officials of the national and county governments that are adversely mentioned in this report, whether you are a cabinet secretary, principal secretary, or chief executive of a state institution, to immediately step aside.
Kwa sahi ninaomba president na deputy president ya kwamba Waiguru aendelee na kazi yake, kwa sababu vijana wanataka kuhudumiwa. Hatuwezi kukubali kila siku kusema step aside, step aside. Hiyo ni namna ya kukoroga sisi tukose mwelekeo. Hati ndio tuchanganyikiwe, ndio atushinde 2017.
All right, Hassan Omar, let me bring you back into this conversation. Do you think, what are your thoughts about what's currently going on at NYS and the back and forth, whether or not the cabinet secretary needs to step aside?
First, Linda, let me just respond to something Kanini said.
Go.
Kanini, the simplistic Jubilee narrative, that whenever the things are not going well, Uhuru tends to pass responsibility elsewhere. When you see that, we talk about Langata Primary School land, it says, oh, it's in Mimi, it is actually Swazuri. So I think what has happened is, but you see people develop or manifest themselves in the character they assume the leadership momentum is headed towards. So if you come in and allow runaway corruption, major infrastructure, major public contracts are taken up by friends and cronies, and there is a major contestation from every award that is in government, then people do have those kind of issues. Here, when it comes to the Code Coalition, our only basis is the fact that we need to be fair to people. If you have started a process that is a charade, that you demonstrate that you're fighting corruption. And if you're saying you're fighting corruption, it's not out of the goodwill of Anne Waiguru that she came and said she had thought that this matter be investigated. This matter was brought to public light by the Star newspaper. When the Star brought it to public light, then now the Code Coalition felt, what is so special about Anne Waiguru? If every other person has been requested to step aside on account of some allegations, some rumors somewhere, which I've heard even members of the Jubilee Coalition, like Murkomen, who are quite good lawyers, contesting the kinds of thresholds that need to be attained before
Hassan,
somebody steps aside.
Hassan, hold on. Let me just interject.
You need to be fair to everybody.
Hassan, to be fair, Manoa Isipisu, that is the president's spokesperson, is on record, and he made it very clear that the cabinet secretary devolution is not under investigation.
is not under investigation.
Yes.
Then she should be under investigation. That, I think, is what we're saying. If money, you see, Linda, from the point at which the news broke out on the Star newspapers, I've seen what the standard newspapers have carried. They have carried literally a litany of correspondences, insubordination, in-house, fights in terms of transfers, in terms of rations, in terms of alleged corruption in the whole institution. And therefore, that one little spark has manifested itself in so many other forms that we realize that there is a deeper issue. And you hear the Jubilee narrative saying that we think it's because it has anything to do with Raila and NYS and, for instance, Kibera or Kisumu. I think if any process is helping the Kenyan people, we are more than delighted to support it. But if this is done under an opaqueness that is losing Kenya money, then it must be investigated. And I think in terms of fairness, we have seen that with that little revelation by one of the media houses, a lot more revelations have come up to realize that not everything is well in that devolution ministry. But everybody is wondering why there's this special kind of place for Waiguru in Uhuru's administration.
Hassan, would you then say that the war on corruption has been politicized?
The politicization was inevitable on the basis that when you pursue the issue of corruption from a point of view of public relations, that you try to do it for the gallery. You defy every decency known under the Constitution, the rule of law, constitutional commissions that you try to decimate. You try to offer jobs to the people who are members of it, and now then bring in flimsy grounds for their disbandment on account, that Kanini and his friends will vote for such a kind of a resolution. Then you've compromised the very institution, because what will happen now, Jubilee will have the capacity to appoint who they want into those commissions, and they will be able to control and literally manipulate the war on corruption. And if you hear even the in-house war, I heard the Jubilee from within themselves are now were saying that Kamau is being fought by cartels, and they are going to expose these cartels. I had minor commander in course to talk about these issues. So even within the Jubilee itself, there is that polarization of that matter, that it does not appear to be a credible matter in terms of the fight against corruption.
Hold on, Hassan. I need Kanini to respond to what you've just said.
Absolutely, that it's actually politics, and I think it started after we won the 2013 general election. And of course, they went to court, and of course, the court upheld our victory. And from that day, they have had this narrative that this government is illegitimate and trying to portray this government as corrupt. It's a question of like giving a dog a bad name and hanging it. Yeah. And I know for sure they are not going to succeed. They have actually targeted most of the ministers who are hardworking. Look at the ministers who are now being arraigned in court. They are the most hardworking ministers. Look at Kamau. Kamau, who is now being charged with redesigning a road in 2007. And if you remember very clearly, that for you to be appointed a minister, you had to be cleared by EACC. Yes, yes. How did they clear Kamau on EACC, yet to them, he had a case? So it also raises a lot of questions, and especially on EACC. Look at the case of Waiguru. Waiguru is the one who raised the issue about the IFMIS, and we had a meeting with the IFMIS team, and they said no money has been lost, and IFMIS is tamper-proof. So whenever they are going around propagating this narrative, I think they are going to note. They are actually coming to note. And any opposition in the world should be a government in waiting.
Do you think they're playing their role as an opposition?
For me, if you ask me, the current opposition that we have, they will forever remain in the opposition.
Right. And remember, we're having a conversation about corruption. In studio, I have Kanini Kega with Mekieni, Member of Parliament, and at our I&M studio, we have Hassan Omar. He is the Mombasa Senator. And a good number of Kenyans remember an incident that happened in 2008 in Parliament when Boni Khalwale went on the floor of the House and made quite a sentiment on the war on corruption, and in particular he was focusing on Amos Kimunya. Then let's listen in.
To stop corruption at the Treasury, Kimunya must go. To end impunity in this country, Kimunya must go. To repossess the Hotel Grand Regency, Kimunya must go. To redress Kenyans who were conned into buying into the IPO of Safaricom, Kimunya must go.
When you look at the manner in which the minister has conducted himself, he has violated every single principle that is contemplated by the Public Officer Ethics Act.
Two leaders who stood on the floor of Parliament and made quite an argument on the fight against corruption that was in 2008. Hassan, let me bring you in at this moment, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, because there's been this back and forth on whether or not the Jubilee administration is corrupt. But you are part of the opposition. What role have you played to ensure that corruption is curbed in the country? Because as we speak, an opposition is expected to play its role of providing checks and balances for the benefit of Kenyans. Has court done that with regard to corruption?
Linda, just before we went for the break, you saw Kanini looking visibly irritated that we have continued to put them on check. He's saying that we will never win government. The only reason we will not win government, if we ever don't, is either you steal an election or because you have these ethnic numbers that you're able to manipulate. There is nothing extraordinary about the manifestation of Jubilee's policy, the eloquence of its leadership, the intellect, or the soundness of their policies. They try to fly to Dubai and return before. So, and I think we've had so many flights that have been a false flight. And I think we are not scared by the fact that you continue to get so irritated and telling us we will not win government. Kenyans out there are best judges of what the opposition is doing. And therefore the opposition will continue to check you. Linda, we have continued to check the Jubilee government. We have exposed scandals. We have strengthened institutions by giving them the confidence that they need to fight, to stick faithful to their mandate. We have continued to articulate in our public forums. They think we're doing it for Obama. They're very simplistic and cheap. We're doing it because this country matters to us. We did it well before we knew that Obama was going to set foot into Kenya. So I think the opposition's greatest weapon is its voice. That's why people like us will continue to come into these studios to speak out. We will continue to be in public rallies until that day where we get government. We will show you what government means, what commitment to fighting corruption will be. It will be done through the rule of law. It will be done through constitutional practice. We will give order to the fight against corruption. There will be no sacred cows. There will be no Waigurus and Gilus where there will be no distinction. Justice will be done, not only, and sin to be done. And therefore, there will be no charade of some members of parliament coming out from a certain region saying, you see, our people from Nyeri are being targeted. Kanini Kega now is contradicting himself, saying the best ministers have suffered the brunt of this whole process. Means therefore he's also accepting the fact that that list is not genuine, that there is politicization and public relations by the very president they're trying to defend. And I think unless you do things in a systematic way, stop this too much of public relation and get down to work in a manner that wins the confidence of the Kenyan people. But you cannot decimate us. We are an opposition that has brains. I think we have the litany of people who mean anything in this country. And when they speak, their voices have credibility. And every Kenyan does know, deep down their hearts, that there's very little being done to fight corruption. It's a charade in its best form.
Okay. Kanini, this is a problem that faces every single Kenyan, irrespective of the political divide which they come from. If you were to work with opposition to fight corruption, what would you want them to do to help?
If you look at that clip, which is well dramatized, it said that fighting corruption is not an event, is a process. If you see that, it was actually dramatized. And
what was dramatized?
The way Dr. Harwale put that case of Kimunya must go, Kimunya must go, Kimunya must go. Unfortunately, he didn't go. Because basically it was actually dramatized.
But by then they were playing their role. So what I'm asking you...
Absolutely. But the opposition, the current opposition that we have, as an opposition, you are supposed to oppose and critique and offer solutions. The current opposition that you have, or we have, they only criticize the government and they do not offer any solution. They don't offer any solution. They just poke holes and they don't offer any way forward. And I think for any responsible opposition, as I said, opposition is a government in waiting. They should always have an alternative. In fact, I thought by now they would even have like shadow cabinet ministers. They should even have they should even bring the shadow budget for them, what they think that they can do if they're in government. So for me, the current opposition is not doing enough. They're just criticizing and all the time crying foul, saying that they are tyranny of numbers, all the time saying that we have the numbers and we are outdoing them. And sometimes you ask yourself, some bills in Parliament are passed by, for example, 100 members of Parliament, and the opposition, they have, at the moment, they have over 125 members of Parliament. So they are not playing their role. Okay. If they want to pass any bill seriously, if they want to oppose or pass bills in Parliament, they can do it. They have the numbers.
Hassan, we are running out of time, but I'll ask you this one final thing. What do we need to do as a country to end corruption? Because this is eating into our society.
First and foremost, Linda, when Kanini speaks, you can tell that he does not know the architecture of the new constitution. He thinks he's actually Jubilean executive. This is a presidential system. You're supposed to be a parliament, and that parliament yes, it's guided by minority and majority, but it is supposed to not to be a tyranny of stupidity, of ignorance. It's supposed to be a tyranny that actually keeps government on check, the executive. So therefore, the fact that you tend to decimate things as if you're living in the old constitution, it tends to mean that you're an extension of Jubilee or the executive in the House. You're supposed to be an independent organ that oversights government, and that's why the opposition has its capital to speak against these vices, because the opposition is severely disnumbered when it comes to the fight against corruption. And Kadidi doesn't listen very keenly when the opposition is speaking. He does not see the alternative. Our alternative is always very clear. We say that Uhuru must not fight it as a public relation exercise. There is a constitution that must guide the actions of any executive. There's a rule of law framework. There are institutions that must not be compromised in terms of their independence and their capacity to work around these issues. You must not cherry pick that you like the executive CEO and therefore give all faith to the CEO and come and say you are briefed privately by the CEO. The CEO is supposed to give you a report as stipulated in the Constitution
Hassan,
to you,
can you
to
hear
the
me?
President and to Parliament, not to give you a confidential
Senator,
brief,
can you hear me?
which is based on rumors. And now Kanini himself is saying that one of his favorite cabinet secretaries is in that list to come out. So I think what happens is there needs to be a structure. There is a constitutional practice. That's why code and all the constituent parties argue that it must be done within the realm of the rule of law. And it must have the commitment and the kind of selflessness to fight corruption, no matter who undertakes those vices that impact on this country adversely. So, Linda, the solution is always there. We always offer alternatives to what we say. But unfortunately, when you don't listen, you just think it's noise and chorus. You think that the opposition must not criticize you. There was a time they said the opposition was saying nothing. And the opposition was
Hassan,
just
in the interest of time, I am sorry, I have to let you go. In the interest of time, Hassan.
They knew this adversary is very easy to vanquish. The only thing that makes this adversary able to be in television discussions is the fact that he has ethnic numbers, and they will be able to manipulate the ethnic numbers.
Senator, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off because of time. I really am going to have to cut you off. Senator, I'm really going to have to cut you off because you're running out of time, but thank you so much for joining us on KTN Prime and for sharing your views on the fight against corruption. I'll leave it at that with you, Kanini. I'll let you have the last word. Quickly, in like 30 seconds, what do we need to do to fight corruption in the country?
I think we need to have a paradigm shift. We need to have a culture change, because even if we say that the government is fighting corruption and our people are also condoning corruption, the people themselves, I think we need to change our culture. We also need to change this aspect that the end justifies the means. If, for example, a poor man vies, for example, for a parliamentary seat or a civic seat, and he is very humble, and of course he is corrupt-free, and a rich person who is corrupt vies, your guess is as good as mine.
We need to change our value system.
Absolutely, we need to change our value system. And very, very importantly, I said that fighting corruption is not an event. It's not a question of arraigning people in parliament. I mean, in the courts with handcuffs and dramatizing the whole thing. It is a process.
I have to end this.
And it is a concerted effort. It's everyone. It is not only the president who is supposed to be fighting corruption.
All right, so that is where we leave it. Thank you for joining us on KTN Prime as well. We have been speaking to Mombasa Senator Hassan Omar and Kieni Member of Parliament Kanini Kega on the fight on corruption in the country. Where are we? What is our scorecard? We thank you for watching this discussion, but stay with KTN. We have more coming your way in just a bit.